imagine that you could be exactly where you wanted to be in 5 years. Like you've got these stellar opportunities in front of you. So then you got to allow yourself to imagine like you're a kid who's pretending or daydreaming and thinking, okay, man, I can be wherever I want in 5 years. I'm a musician. I've already got an audience. I've got an audience of people who want to hear me. I've got a lot of commercial options. And then I have a private life that I enjoy. Okay, how could I bring all of those together in the optimal way? What would that look like? And that's got to be, that's, there's this line in the Gospels that says that you should ask and you'll receive. You should knock and the door will open, and you should seek and you'll find. And that's actually an injunction to a kind of meditative prayer. And the idea fundamentally, and this works like a charm, is what the hell do you want? Just imagine that fortune could conceivably smile on you in the way that it has in the last couple of weeks, and you could set up your future so that it was literally your dream. What would that look like? Like, you obviously like performing. I mean, we could do that a little bit right now. If you imagine you could have a year where you had exactly the right balance between performing and having a private life. Like, what size audiences do you like playing for?
Yeah, that's kind of the challenge. I love the intimacy of a smaller. I mean, we did the farm market. We had about 12,000 show up, and even with that, despite everyone telling me I was a fool for doing it, I stayed and did like a meet and greet after for about 4.5 hours, but it gave me enough time that I was able to I'd like it to stay at a level. I'd like to have opportunities to be able to meet people. So 10 or 12,000 people. I mean, we've got a few coming up that size. You go back to your point about trying to sort of paint a mental picture of 5 years ahead. I know you had talked about that at some point in a lecture, and that's actually, I give you some credit for me sitting in the chair I'm in now, because I have done that from your recommendation. I did your self-authoring program and all, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And, the thing that really spoke to me the most, though, was, your story about your friend Chris, because I'm Chris. And,
oh yeah.
I was
really. Oh man.
And I was, you talked about your friend Chris being an aspiring musician and getting high all the time, and like, if I recall correctly, Chris was from what I could interpret, like with my own experience, maybe he was even experiencing some like cannabis induced psychosis and all. I remember the story. I think it was Chris that was in the other room, and like, I realized like maybe I'm Chris, So
well, there's part of the reason I wrote about my friend. He eventually committed suicide at about the age of 40. After he phoned me one night, he had got a bunch of his short stories published in a small book, in an anthology from Northern Alberta. And he's actually a pretty good short story writer. He was a good photographer too. He was quite a brilliant man, this friend of mine. And he did smoke too much pot, and it wasn't good for him. And maybe there was something else going on there too, but he became very bitter and resentful. And partly because, he regarded his own ambition as evil. He was one of these demoralized young men, an early version of it, a sensitive person, and easily made guilty. And the constant harping about, the evil patriarchy and the terrible consequence of male ambition just absolutely did him in, and it played into his own unwillingness to accept responsibility in a kind of pathological way. It was very sad. Like, I knew him for years, and he lived with me in Montreal when he was older, in his 30s, my wife and I, for a while, and we tried to help him get his life back on track, and did to some degree, but then he left and went back to Alberta. Anyways, he committed suicide the day after he had phoned me and told me about having this publication. He went out in a truck and hooked a tube to the exhaust and in his truck, and smoked cigarettes up in the mountains, and, just let himself go. And it was quite the bloody catastrophe, but it was one of those situations where, his life was too aimless, and he didn't take his own potential with enough seriousness, he regarded his ambition as evil. He kind of became a nihilistic Buddhist in the worst possible sense. And, and drifted. It was really a real waste of talent. And so it's a hell of a thing to hear you say, that you saw some him in you, but it's very, very common. And it is a lot better to develop a vision. You talked about this self-authoring program. You need a vision, man. And so now you said you talked to 12, you sang to 12,000 people, and that was good, but you liked the personal contact with the meet and greet. So my team sets up meet and greets after my event at every event. And so that's a premium ticket. And, you can, what would you say, satirize that as excess capitalist exploitation, but you have to parse people in some manner when a lot of people want to see you. And it's also the case, that people want to enter into a reciprocal agreement. And so if they're really happy with you and what you're doing, they also want to contribute. And that's part of reasonable trade. Now, I love the meet and greets. I only meet people for about 15 seconds probably. And but I've learned to put them at ease very quickly and to get a bit of a interaction. One of the things I've learned, for example, is that when people approach you and put out their hand to shake your hand, and that's going to happen to you on the street all the time now, obviously, is that you can match your tempo to theirs, like a dance. You move towards them about as quickly as they move towards you. And I always ask people what their name is, because even if they're nervous, most people can remember their name. And once they tell you that, that sort of puts them at ease. And I really like the meet and greets, because it also helps you remember that it differentiates the audience back into individuals. And you should always be communicating with individuals. As soon as you start talking to the crowd, as something Kierkegaard pointed out, as soon as you start talking to the crowd, you're immediately lying. You have to be talking to the individuals in the crowd. And so I think you can have your cake and eat it on the touring front. You can sing to large audiences, but you can keep that intimacy if you structure it properly. And then you also don't get on your high horse too badly, because, people are always coming up to you and telling you, well, like the story that you just told about the guy who came up to you, with his brother who was in such trouble. And hearing those sorts of stories from people and seeing them open themselves up like that, it knocks the ego out of you. That's a really important thing to have happen to you when you're touring too, because when you're the center of that much attention, you can get puffed up. That's so dangerous, man. It's so dangerous to have that happen.
Yeah, I don't ever want to sit in a position to where I feel like I'm better than anyone that I'm singing to. Yeah, I don't like that ego that you see come with people that are in celebrity status. Like it's a tragedy, because it ends up, the person changes into something completely different than what people fell in love with them for in the first place, Yeah, like I don't see myself any different than anyone else that I'm like, and that's what's been so weird about this whole thing anyway, is like when I am approached, and of course, maybe I need to shave my beard and cut my hair and wear a hat, and then I can go out in the public for a couple of days. But I kind of stand out in the crowd anyway, at my height and red hair and all. And so, yeah, but it hasn't been at least not yet. It hasn't been a bother. It's been nice to know that. It's been nice to know that it has made a positive impact on people. Like, I don't know. I've just felt so hopeless for the future for such a long time that, like, seeing people feel something that I haven't seen in a long time means a lot. It means a lot more to me than anything else, than the money or whatever,
What made you said that for a long time you had felt hopeless about the future, and you alluded to this song that you wrote too about sobriety. And also about identifying to some degree, let's say with my friend Chris. What do you think it was that tempted you to feel hopeless about the future, and how have you dealt with that to the degree that you have, and how have you dealt with that successfully?
The hopelessness, I think, comes from seeing us all, like, we find fault in each other instead of finding common ground in each other anymore. Like, to your point about Chris, and like with, and that's one of the verses in the popular song, is that Um, it references young men committing suicide at this ridiculous rate they are today, because yeah, and I don't know why it is. I think it's almost been, again, through social media and sort of the parasitic way that it alters our thinking, like by just, we read every day things that just change our perception of each other. But we've gotten to a point where it's easier for us to try to find differences and faults in each other instead of similarities, which we all hold much more common ground than we do difference. I mean, we're all very biologically similar, and we all have to acquire some amount of money. Most of us have ambitions of raising a family, or at least developing friendships. Like, I'd say 90% of the people that at least exist in North America are very similar in almost every way. But it's like we've somehow found the nitpick, arbitrary differences that we hold, and we exploit those and blow those up. And so, yeah, it feels hopeless because we are more divided today than we've ever been. Like, everything's politicized. Everything is about one party or one person trying to hold some moral high ground over the other, just for the sake of being able to point your finger down at them, and it's like, what the hell are we doing? Like, we have just an incredible opportunity to live in the place that we do. The fact that you and I can use free speech and free thought, because speech and thought are one and the same. Like, if people aren't able to have open, honest conversations with each other, they aren't able to conceptualize new ideas that takes us into a better place than whatever place we were in previously. Like, that's human existence 101. And so to see that being threatened, and to see us all sort of being put into these categories and these political buckets, it's like, even just our own, even the personalities of people have been weaponized against each other. You made a good point. It's been a couple years ago, maybe, where you were talking about, and I'd never looked at people this way prior, but you were talking about how just in people's own persona and their personality and the way they think, people can be more conservative or liberal. Like, entrepreneurial, imaginative people are typically more liberal. And, like in a business, you've got the CEO is typically going to have a more conservative perspective, and the guy coming up with the new ideas, the entrepreneurial guy, he's going to be more liberal. And it's like, it seems like whoever this they is, the man behind the curtain, if you will. I don't know if that's just, I don't know I don't know how to explain that side of it, but it seems like things have become very much like taking the imaginative, creative person and weaponizing him against the more traditionalist, grounded person. Instead of them using their strengths together to sort of build a brighter future, it's about taking each other and seeing how far we can take this thing. But ultimately, my hopelessness comes from like, what is this country, or what is this world going to look like in 20 or 30 years? Like, what world are my kids going to live in? Are they going to be allowed to say what they think? Are they going to even be able to walk down the sidewalk? I mean, like, better than most about just the atrocities that went on 100 years ago, 150 years ago. Like, we're so close to falling back into that. That's really where my hopelessness comes from. But I do believe things can be turned around for the better in a short period of time. It's just people have to sort of retrain the way they think about each other, and ultimately the way they think about themselves,